Osu has its fair share of legacy-defining eras in its history, ones where some of the greatest players cemented their legacies and others that created many rivalries that stand the test of time. And in the early stages of Osu's evergreen tournament scene, there was one team that ruled the world. In 2013, South Korea was untouchable. They were undoubtedly Osu's strongest nation and produced some of the greatest players to ever touch the game, heading 3 back-to-back-to-back victories at the Osu World Cup. They dominated the biggest stage Osu has to offer, and they were Osu's first true juggernaut. But as quick as their rise was, the Osu landscape began to rapidly change, and out of nowhere, Osu's original super team was cast aside as a brand new dynasty emerged and mercilessly broke the records that once belonged to them. This new age super team quickly decimated everyone in their path, hopelessly leaving everyone in their wake of dominance as they grew into undoubtedly the strongest team in Osu history, and it wasn't even close. Winning came so easily and frequently to them that many pleaded for someone to end their reign, with some going as far to call them the villain. But no matter the narratives pitted against them, they continued to win in spite of these wishes, and it felt like the cries for a change at the top would be nothing more than a plea to be left unanswered. But in the wake of their dominance, there was one team that proved they had what it takes to do the impossible and finally bring an end to their tyranny, and it was none other than Osu's original super team. For more than a decade, South Korea had been vying to return their place atop the Osu world, and while they have gotten close on repeated occasions, their efforts were only met with bitter defeat. With the many brutal fates they were met with and the questions that circled around the future of their roster, time was running out for this team as they desperately searched for the long-awaited moment of redemption and resurgence. As time went on, it felt like they needed to win now more than ever, and by a few miracle chances, they found the pieces they needed to make it happen. Not only could they make history once again and return to their winning ways, they could also free the Osu community from the unbreakable reign they had no choice but to accept. Yet despite these developments, their efforts were only met with more anguish. For South Korea, heartbreak was the reality they were forced to come to terms with. For some, heartbreak can spell the end of everything. But for a select few, it's a reminder that not only do they have one to begin with, but they also carry the passion and willpower to make anything happen, no matter what it takes or the odds that were pitted against them. And finally, after toiling with heartbreak for so long, Osu's original dynasty became Osu's team of destiny.
Korea's in the lead! It's Tuna!
He's just created a tiebreaker here against Germany, even though he and Karuna have done so much.
Don't do this, Karcher. You are not allowed. I think South Korea might be doing this.
It's always USA as the villain in these matches, but it's never enough for them. Just falling a little bit short this time.
Are we sure Faker's at Worlds and not here right now?
Birthday Chomp Player, you are a beast!
Birthday Chomp Player, it's blowing the world away! The world is watching an absolutely mesmerizing play! It is the beginning of the end for the South Korean gifted story! South Korea moments away from achieving what is so long felt impossible! You need miracles, but the time is ticking! Dynasty destroyers! Past deleters!
This is South Korea!
On January 31st, 2011, about 3.5 years after Osu's initial release, the very first rendition of the Osu World Cup, or OWC for short, would take place. The format was simple. Country-based teams from all over the world would battle it out live for everyone to watch in the quest to don the crown of being an Osu champion. But little did anyone know at the time how rich of a history this tournament series would carry. In the years that followed, OWC grew into by far Osu's most prestigious and iconic tournament series. If there was a tournament that every Osu player wanted to win the most, it would be the Osu World Cup without any question. And as far as the early years of the tournament are concerned, South Korea immediately left their mark. At the first rendition of the Osu World Cup, South Korea went on a respectable run, making it to the semi-finals where they would suffer an unfortunate tiebreaker loss to the eventual champions Taiwan 4-3. Their run at the first OWC would end at a respectable 3rd place after defeating Chile in the 3rd place playoff match. Even if they didn't win, they were already off to a great start. In fact, they were quite literally just one map away from making it to the grand finals right out the gate, and things would only continue to get better for them. In late 2011, the second Osu World Cup would take place, and South Korea entered the tournament with an absolutely loaded roster. Their team consisted of Crazy, Cheese, Kirikaru, Clementine, Reisen Udongein, and Remelius Scarlet. They were undeniably the strongest team entering the tournament, and they would deliver on the hype surrounding them in destructive fashion. They would dominate all their opponents at each stage of the tournament, and after defeating Japan in the grand finals, South Korea claimed their first ever OWC title in team history, finishing with a map record of 14-2 in the main bracket and leaving all of their opponents in the dust. The very next year in 2012, they carried carried the lofty expectations of potentially going back-to-back, not just because they emerged victorious in the year prior, but their roster only seemed to get better. Crazy, Clementine, Cheese, Kirikaru, and Reisen Udongein would return to the team to run it all back, and they would add other Osu legends in Beatrice and Dungeon to further bolster their roster. But their most notable roster improvement came with adding the undisputed best player in the world and arguably the greatest player of all time, Cookiezi. Cookiezi found himself on the South Korean roster in the first rendition of OWC, but was absent from OWC number 2 during a stretch of taking periodic breaks from playing the game at the time. But now, he found himself returning to the roster once again, and with this absolute juggernaut of a team, it was no surprise that South Korea would once again tear up the entire tournament. They would emerge from the group stage with an undefeated 12-0 map record to qualify for the main bracket. From there, they would once again make light work of all their opponents and route to a second OWC title in a row after defeating Japan in grand finals once again. South Korea's path to victory was pure perfection, as they finished the tournament with a map record of an astonishing 34-4. They were absolutely untouchable, and they became the first team in Osu history to amass multiple OWC victories. And now they were looking to do the unthinkable in 2013, completing the illustrious three-peat. Winning a championship is the ultimate end goal in any sport or competitive event. Win one, and you permanently etch your name in the history books. Go back-to-back, and you're a bona fide dynasty. But if you can somehow find the resolve to win 3 in a row, your dominance defines an era centered around your winning ways. So as 2013 rolled around, South Korea were looking to do more of the same. However, their roster would look significantly different. While Dungeon, Kirikaru, and Cheese would return to the roster in hopes of completing the three-peat, 5 players on their winning roster in the year prior would be absent this time around. Most notably, Cookiezi was absent from the roster after infamously self-banning himself. If they wanted to contend once again, they needed to not just find a replacement for the best player in the world at the time, but for more than half of their roster as well. Thankfully though, South Korea's talent depth was more than enough to make up for those losses, and they had heavy-hitting names to compensate. Reimu-desu, sayonara-bye, Fury, Shizuru, and Tengu were the 5 players that would make their OWC debuts in 2013. When you can replace 5 players that elevated you to championship glory with 5 other top-tier players, you know you're in good hands. And as the tournament started, South Korea were once again primed to win the Osu World Cup. Just like last year, they would qualify for the main bracket with ease, and breeze past everyone they faced in the main bracket to make it to the grand finals yet again, where they would face Taiwan to set up a battle of the only 2 OWC champions up to that point. Unlike their previous matches, South Korea didn't have an easy route to victory, as this was by far their most tightly contested match and their toughest opponent they had to face in their winning era. Taiwan were heavy favorites to take the tournament alongside South Korea, entering with a 28-2 map record entering the grand finals. That was by no means a fluke either, as Taiwan's roster was headed by Rucker, Yuan, and HVIC225, 3 of the most iconic names in Osu history, and they had incredible support from the rest of their teammates as well. The match was intense throughout as both teams struggled to find a significant advantage, eventually finding their way to a 5-5 tie. With the grand finals being best of 11 or first to 6, it meant that the next map would decide the champions of the 2013 Osu World Cup. And in this winner-take-all scenario, South Korea would valiantly emerge on top thanks to massive scores from sayonara-bye and Dungeon, and the South Korean three-peat was officially completed. While it was far from easy this time around, South Korea once again stood strong above everyone else as they proved that this game runs through them and them only.
Congratulations to Korea once again. 3rd year in a row they win the Osu World Cup.
No matter their opposition, they showed they were simply unstoppable as their prowess reached levels that transcend the game's boundaries. All the legendary names they bolstered, their unmatched gameplay, their unwavering resolve in the most intensive moments, it felt like they would continue their winning ways for years to come. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. In 2014, the Osu World Cup would go through a significant change. For the first time ever, OWC will run a double elimination tournament in light of the newfound attention the game was getting and the growing player base, as well as in hopes of making the tournament scene more professional. The 3-time defending champions South Korea were the main storyline, but their momentum was quietly dying out. Their roster in 2014 was weaker in comparison to the other South Korean teams in years past, but nonetheless it featured some great talent that could easily make a run for the title once again. However, things immediately got out to a rocky start. The major cracks in the 3-time title defense truly showed themselves when South Korea would suffer their first match loss in more than 3 years after losing to Germany 3-4 in the group stage. Even with that blemish on the record, they were still able to qualify for the main bracket, but things didn't get any better for them. They would proceed to get sent to the losers bracket after Poland defeated them 5-2 in winners quarterfinals. South Korea would then put on a formidable losers bracket run that included surviving 2 tiebreaker scares against Russia and Taiwan to get into the top 4 once again, but that was where their luck would finally run out as they fell to Japan in tiebreaker fashion, exiting at 4th place.
This is the first time that they've ever been knocked out of a World Cup since the first World Cup ever. That's it. South Korea for the first time are out. This is where it gets very interesting, guys. This is where it gets incredibly interesting.
On paper, dropping from 3 straight first place victories down to 4th sounds like a bitter disappointment, but there was still a ton of hope for them to bounce back. The 3 teams they ended up losing to turned out to be the top 3 placing teams of the tournament, and they were 1 map away from winning their matches against Germany and Japan, the 3rd and 1st placing teams respectively. While they were no longer the powerhouse they once were before, they were still among the strongest teams in the world, but if they wanted to prove that claim, they first needed to back it up in the OWC match lobbies. In 2015, South Korea's roster would undergo a massive overhaul as Gomo and Mathclass were the only 2 players that would return to the team after their defeat in 2014. Reimu-desu would also make their return after a small absence in the year prior, with the other 5 players on their team Ineda, Sinia Pacifica, Enon, Daidong, and Meltina all making their OWC debuts. Without the pressure of maintaining a title defense, perhaps they could make a mental reset and get back to winning. And things looked bright from the start. South Korea looked much better this time around as they emerged from the group stage undefeated, and they were able to take down the United Kingdom and France in the first 2 rounds of the bracket to make it to winter semifinals where they would have to face off against the United States, their future greatest rivals. This would be the first time South Korea and the United States would face each other in the OSU World Cup, and the tales of these 2 teams in this matchup couldn't be any more different. South Korea were the ones who already established themselves as OSU champions numerous times over, although this time around their overall performance was trending downwards relative to their absolute peak. The United States, on the other hand, didn't find much success up to this point, but were a team with rising strength looking to make waves. Even with a loss here, the US were guaranteed to match their best finish at any OSU World Cup to date, and perhaps that mindset carried its way into the match as the United States would come out on top 6-2, sending South Korea to the losers bracket where they would once again fizzle out at 4th place after losing to Poland. And about a week later, that same United States team would win the 2015 OSU World Cup in dramatic fashion, becoming the 4th different team to claim the OWC title and the first country outside of Asia to be crowned OSU champions. This new standstill South Korea found themselves in was not a pleasant place to be in contrast to their runs that resulted in championships. But luckily for them, their roster would add 1 brand new key piece in 2016, the legendary Firebat 92, also known as Angel Sim. Angel Sim is without a doubt an OSU icon and one of the best players to ever touch the game. In 2017, he reached number 1 in the OSU rankings, becoming the 4th South Korean player to ever claim OSU's number 1 rank after the creation of OSU's PP system, joining Cookiezi, Reimu-desu, and sayonara-bye. And not only did he reach the top of the OSU rankings, he was able to defend his place at the top numerous times against a prime Cookiezi and a prime Rafis, overtaking them for the number 1 spot on numerous occasions. His addition to the South Korean OWC roster in 2016 was an unbelievable help on their quest to reclaim the throne. And South Korea had a roster that rivaled the strength of their championship winning teams of years past, and they came out swinging. They would emerge from the group stage undefeated once again and make quick work of Italy, Germany, and Taiwan in the main bracket, advancing to the winners finals with a guaranteed spot in the top 3, securing their best finish at the OSU World Cup in the double elimination era. And in winners finals, they faced up against the United States once again. While their meeting in 2015 was a bit of a mismatch, their encounter this time around would be much more contested. It looked like things would wind up differently this time as South Korea took a 4-2 lead to start the match. But it wasn't to last, as they would surrender the final 4 maps in a row to lose the match 4-6 as the United States advanced to the winner's side of grand finals. SK wouldn't even get the chance to have their run back as China would completely light them up 6-2, eliminating them at 3rd place. It was a small improvement, yes, but times have changed and it was clear that they just couldn't be top tier teams like they once used to. And while they wrestled with those thoughts and frustrations, the United States would end up winning OWC 2016, securing back-to-back titles and joining South Korea as the only 2 teams with multiple OWC victories.
I believe that's actually the only time a champion has successfully defended it other than maybe South Korea?
Other than South Korea, yes, that's right.
Now there was a team that was vying for South Korea's spot as the best team of all time, and many looked to see how SK would respond to the new challengers. But that response turned out to be another dud. In 2017, South Korea would regress back to their disappointing 4th place plateau after suffering an early upset loss to Taiwan in the first round.
A little bit lacking or lackluster on South Korea's side, I'd say. I definitely think they do have the potential and they definitely need to get those performances off the way.
From there, they would go on an impressive 4-set losers run, but after losing to the United Kingdom, South Korea would be denied a top 3 OWC badge for the 3rd time in the last 4 years. It has now been 4 years since South Korea last made it to the championship match at the OSU World Cup, but at the very least, they were still putting up formidable finishes and were a respectable dark horse team. Some believe they still have what it takes, but in 2018, all hope anyone had would be completely thrown out the window. South Korea had by far their worst performance in team history in the 2018 OSU World Cup as they sank all the way down to 9th to 12th place and were only able to manage 1 win in the main bracket. They were now completely out of the running for title contention, and their winning era felt nothing more than a distant memory as the once unstoppable super team was now effortlessly being walked out by previously weaker opposition.
Large mistakes. Selena failed!
No!
And as the United States came through and won their third OWC title in the past 4 years to match South Korea as the only two teams with 3 Osu World Cup victories, it felt like the times were changing as Osu was witnessing a brand new dynasty take their place. It was clear that if they wanted to re-establish themselves as contenders, let alone have a chance to defend their status as the greatest team ever, they needed a change. Specifically, they needed a brand new superstar to bring their team back to their glory days. And luckily for them, they found a player that would change South Korea's Osu culture forever. Although South Korea's 2018 roster would completely bomb out, there was one player on that team willing to pull them out of the mud. That player was Flying Tuna. Flying Tuna was a fan of the Osu Tatakai Owendan series for the Nintendo DS and searched for new songs and patterns beyond those present in the base games. Knowing this, his sister would introduce him to the PC version of the game in 2009, although his activity was incredibly sparse with a sub 1000 play count over a time period of 7 years. It wasn't until November 4th, 2016, where in an IT room at school with some of his friends, the conversation shifted to the topic of PC games, where eventually Osu was mentioned. And it was on that same day, fueled with new inspiration, that Tuna would create his Osu account under the name Philip0609. And from that point onwards, his unbelievable prowess would begin to show itself as he desired to be the absolute best player he could possibly be. What initially started off as him simply playing mass on some songs he liked quickly turned into using Tillerina to farm after discovering the PP system. As a result, Tuna quickly flew up the Osu rankings, reaching the 4-digit ranks on July 23rd, 2017 after just 8 months of playing the game. In his first couple of years of playing, Tuna was one of the best aim players in the game with incredible AR-11 reading capabilities. His aim hand was by far his greatest strength. His tapping hand, however, was a nagging weakness he needed to address. While solely focusing on aim was a perfect way to rise the ranks in the jump-oriented meta back then, being one-dimensional wasn't going to cut it in the tournament scene. Tuna was fully aware of this, and in 2018, he fully dedicated himself to intensive speed and stamina training. After a few months, his efforts would bear fruit as his typing saw massive improvements, and now with much more well-rounded skills, Tuna would use his reformed skill set as the foundation that would soon turn him into one of the best tournament players in Osu history. Flying Tuna would make his debut on the South Korean OWC roster in 2018, although his addition was met with a bit of negative reception as SK would end up with their worst ever placement in team history. At the time, Tuna lacked the tournament experience needed to elevate his team, and everything was just a flat-out mess for him and South Korea's OWC hopes. Not to be deterred, however, Tuna would continue the grind and sought tournament experience to better himself for the future and be much more prepared as time went on. From that point forward, Tuna would find himself competing in many more tournaments to further solidify his skills in preparation for the many big tournament moments he would inevitably encounter throughout the course of his playing career. He would add a few tournament badges to his name after winning Osu TV Size Tournament 2019, Test Tournament 2, Gotta Aim Fast 6, and Osu Korean Tournament 10. The win at OKT 10 was especially impressive, as Tuna showed that he was now South Korea's best tournament player, a growing sentiment that was now almost unanimously agreed upon. Tournament growth was not the only improvement that Tuna would stumble upon, as he would also make history in the realm of solo play. He would reach the top 10 at the tail end of 2018 on December 17th, 2018, and 3 months after that, on February 11th, 2019, Flying Tuna would become the 6th South Korean player in Osu history to reach number 1 on the Osu rankings. This, along with his vital tournament experience, gave him the confidence he needed heading into the 2019 Osu World Cup, where his impact would ripple throughout Osu history. South Korea's OWC 2019 roster consisted of Tuna alongside Gomo, Arisia, DDM, Firebat92, Ponytail, Zayson, and Karuna. At the start, no one really knew what to think of this team. The first good look anyone would get was during the newly established qualifier stage, where they would find out South Korea would enter the tournament as the 9th seed. For many, there was nothing to write home about this. On paper, they were slated to repeat their 9th to 12th place finish in 2018 without making too much of an impact. And initially, it seemed like that 9th place seeding was completely justified. After defeating New Zealand in the first round, South Korea would lose to Australia 2-5 and were at risk of early elimination once again. If they wanted to redeem themselves from their horrific showing in 2018, they needed a burst of excellence, and fast. A 6-2 win over the 19th-seeded Japan and a 6-0 win over the 17th-seeded France would come easy as they advanced to the top 12 to at least match the 2018 placement. But their path from here on out would only get more treacherous. If South Korea wanted to get any further into the tournament, they would need to cause some upsets. On paper, it looked like their end was near, but this time around, they wouldn't settle for anything short of greatness. In their first match of the semifinals weekend, they faced the 7th-seeded Taiwan and narrowly escaped with a 6-4 victory to avenge their defeat in 2017. Next came the 5th-seeded Brazil, the same team who eliminated them from last year's OWC. This time around, things would work out massively in South Korea's favor as they took down Brazil 6-1 to advance to the finals weekend and the top 6. Now they had to go against the 12th-seeded Russia in a battle of 2 Cinderella stories, but South Korea would squeak by 7-5 to make it to the top 4, where their opposition was was the toughest it could possibly be.
We've got 4 teams still left in the tournament. United States, United Kingdom, Germany, and South Korea. Any combination of those 2 teams facing each other will be one hell of a match.
Those 3 teams were the rating top 3 placing teams at OWC in the year prior, and if South Korea wanted to win this tournament, they would have to go through each and every single one of them. And first up in that quest was Germany. Despite the rising pressure and their stronger opposition, South Korea would continue building on their incredible momentum with a 7-4 victory to make it to the top 3 for the first time since 2016. And now, the only team standing in their way of their first championship match in 6 years was the United Kingdom. Last year, they made it to the grand finals and even managed to take a match off the United States, and now they were looking to get back there once again. Heading into this match, everyone expected a UK victory and a repeat of the 2018 grand finals.
It flew under the radar somewhat. It's kind of strange because this team's always had a strong lineup. They've always tended to fall short, right? Because they haven't had a finals appearance since 2013.
Many thought that it would take a miracle for South Korea to come out on top of this match, but luckily for them, they had a miracle worker on their team, and his name was Flying Tuna. Tuna was on fire in this match and top-scored his team on repeated occasions, but he was not fighting alone as Karuna came in clutch with incredible support. The overall performance of all their teammates were also vital in keeping them in this match, but eventually they found themselves in a 5-6 deficit with a breakpoint disadvantage and were 1 map away from elimination.
Oh, it's bad. It's bad for Korea. Nearly all of them are gone. All of them missed. It's Karthi. Karthi standing alone, bringing the UK home.
Now they had to find a way to not only win the United Kingdom's final map pick, but they also needed to beat them in the tiebreaker map to keep their tournament run alive. And that was where Tuna and his other teammates would step it up when it mattered most. They would force the tiebreaker map to be played by sealing away the UK's Hard Rock 3 pick thanks to a monster score from Tuna and incredible support from all his teammates.
I need a pacemaker right now, dude. This is not okay.
It didn't look like it was going to be, 5-3, UK led, but South Korea has come back.
This match now came down to one final map, but it looked like the United Kingdom would prevail as they gained a sizable lead entering the last quarter of the tiebreaker. On the other side, Zayson and Tuna held on to massive combos to try and save themselves in the dying stretches of this match. However, Zayson would soon find a miss, leaving Tuna on his own, but suddenly, a chance arose.
He needs spare to break. Flying Tuna, it's on his own.
All combos on the UK side would suddenly vanish, but Tuna continued to hold strong. But with the end of the map fast approaching, was it enough?
It's going to be a nail biter on the tiebreaker that looks so decisively one-sided because of Bubbleman's combo. It is Korea now. Korea's in the lead. It's Tuna. Bubbleman, step aside. Tuna is now the only big combo. Oh, can you even believe it? The map is closing. Tiebreaker coming to an end. Korea is in the lead. Oh no. It's happened.
When it looked like their time was all but up, Flying Tuna willed South Korea to a 7-6 victory that no one could have seen coming, and the immense excitement carried into his now iconic celebration.
가자! 가자! 얘들아! 얘들아! 가자! This is South Korea!
Tuna yelling "This is South Korea" would soon turn into a mainstay quote within the Osu community, and it was well justified considering the new reality that was beginning to sink in. With this win, South Korea clinched a spot in the grand finals of the Osu World Cup for the first time since 2013 and their first ever grand finals appearance in the double elimination era. They exceeded all expectations and captured the hearts of many through their resolve, and now they only had one last opponent in their way of completing the miracle run of a lifetime. Waiting for them in the grand finals was a familiar foe, the United States. They only lost a total of 3 maps throughout the course of the tournament thus far, and they were fresh off of clean sweeps on Russia and the United Kingdom, 2 teams that South Korea had close scares with.
I think that this is probably the most dominant performance we've seen in a World Cup ever.
If that is the difference between these 2 teams right now, that is absurd. The USA are so strong this year.
This match had legacies on the line as well, as the winner would be the first team to claim 4 OWC titles, the most in Osu history, and it was fitting that it came down to a battle between Osu's original super team and the New Age dynasty. As daunting of a task it was, if there was one team that could overcome the odds that unseat the United States, it was South Korea. Throughout the course of the tournament, they completely defied expectations and were on a run that many felt should have ended a long time ago. They were on the Cinderella run of Cinderella runs, and now in their first OWC Grand Finals in 6 years, who says it can't be them? Who says they can't be the ones to do it? Who says... The United States would bring South Korea's magical run to a screeching halt as they would sweep them out of the tournament 7-0 and complete the most dominant run at any OWC ever. Damn. That was a bit of an anticlimactic end, but South Korea could hold their heads high with a second place finish, their best result at OWC since their win in 2013. But unfortunately, history is only written by the victors, as with this win, the United States were now the team with the most OWC titles and were on all counts the strongest and greatest team of all time. The once untouchable South Korean team of legend was now displaced by a brand new dynasty and their greatest rivals. But they proved they could very well return to the top of the OSU world once again. Their team was back in OSU's elite, and they looked poised to one-up their performance in 2020. Entering OWC 2020, South Korea stood as the 5 seed, a massive step up from last year's qualifier result. With the roster improvements they made, many thought it was finally time for their resurgence. After all, if they were able to get second place as the 9th seed, all while beating some of the best teams in the world in the year prior, imagine what they could do with a higher seed and a better roster on paper. Everyone looked forward to what they would do this time around, until they absolutely bombed out of the tournament with a 7th and 8th place finish after losing to Germany in winners 4-6 and getting completely demolished by Brazil in a shocking 0-6 sweep. Well, there's always next year, right? Not exactly. For other teams, a disappointing performance like this wouldn't be too much of a concern. Yes, it sucks, but if teams feel confident in their current roster, they could simply prepare for next year and run it back with their core players. They get a whole year to tinker their roster and make necessary changes. But for South Korea, however, that really isn't an option for them. Many of their players often leave the game in the prime of their playing careers because of their mandatory military service. A lot of their players only have so many years before they must step away from the game, and sadly, Flying Tuna's military service was fast approaching as he was set to depart in 2021. Thankfully, his leave date was set beyond the conclusion of OWC, and so South Korea had one last shot to win it all with Tuna on their roster. Their titleless runs in the years prior left much to be desired, and now with Tuna's pending military service being an extra chip on their shoulder, they can make this year their all-or-nothing push and focus all their efforts into winning at all costs. For their all-in push, they gathered a roster of Karuna, Flying Tuna, Zaysin, Doomsday Fanboy, Nope KJK, Rankajai, Karcher, and Mayas. It wasn't just Tuna that was set to leave this year, however. Many of their players alongside him would also be stepping away from the game at the end of OWC 2021, leaving the future of the team uncertain. As such, they had a multitude of reasons to give their departing players a proper send-off with an OWC victory, although the road ahead of them would be challenging. They would enter the tournament as the 9th seed, the same seed they had in their miracle run in 2019. 9th felt like a serious underrating for this team, but that's just how it was, and they had to bear the hardships of a tougher bracket as a mid-seeded team once again. After defeating Ukraine 5-0, they would face off against the 8th-seeded United Kingdom in a rematch of their 2019 losers final encounter. And just like last time, the match between these two teams would go down to the tiebreaker map. And once again, this match came down to the final seconds. In the final 10% of the map, the difference stood at just 10,000 points with even combos on both sides. It was Bubbleman and Blue for the United Kingdom and Karuna and Karcher for South Korea. Whichever side could hold on to these closing combos would be the one to win this match, and it would be the United Kingdom as Bubbleman and Blue survived the pressure to win the match for their team.
The United Kingdom, they finally get a victory on the board against South Korea, but it didn't come easy.
South Korea once again had an early trip to the losers bracket and were once again in serious danger. With how many players were set to leave at tournament's end, this would be a terribly sad note to end on. Losing was not an option for them. If this was all they could muster as an all-in push, everything would wind up as a massive disappointment. A deep losers bracket push similar to their miracle run in 2019 was perhaps too much to ask for with how difficult it would be. But if it were to happen, it would bring poetic justice to the narratives this team carried. There's no way, right?
South Korea is four-weighing, and there's no way to fight against that. They're going to put up a 4.5 million score. And they four-weighing. 4.57 million! 4.57 million!
Yeah. South Korea to send Japan home in the semi-finals.
Doomsday Fanboy drops a 900, but into the slower sliders and into the outro.
South Korea advance once again.
Canada taking the break point in a 4-2 lead, and South Korea, they needed that. This is a very strong showing. I don't think anything in 7-5 over Canada, and our 2019 grand finalists will have a shot to make it back to the grand finals next week.
Now they had all the momentum in the world. South Korea won their last 6 matches in a row to make it to the losers bracket grand finals and secured a guaranteed top 3 OWC badge. They sat just 3 match wins away from completing the perfect dream run to win their first OWC in 8 years. The last team that stood in their way between them and the championship match was Germany, who were looking to make it to their 2nd straight grand final in a row. And starting out, things immediately looked bleak. Germany stormed out to take a quick 6-2 lead to get to match point. It seemed like it was over for South Korea as Germany looked like they were going to run away with this one, but never questioned the fight of a hungry South Korean roster. Out of nowhere, South Korea won the next 4 maps in a row, including 2 breakpoints to tie the match at 6-6 and force the tiebreaker to be played. What once seemed like the end of a dream soon had the potential to turn into the greatest losers bracket run in OWC history.
I think a lot of people going into this match really thought that this was a very Germany-favored match overall, and Korea has proved them wrong time and time again.
From going down in the round of 16, winning 6 matches in a row, and now defending 4 match points in losers grand finals, there was legitimate hope to keep this train going and complete the ultimate storyline. Not even the best scriptwriters could come up with something like this. But it wasn't meant to be. Germany would edge out South Korea on the tiebreaker to end their miraculous run at 3rd place. SK put up one hell of a fight, but their efforts would once again fall just short.
And even though Tuna has that high score in solo, even though he and Karuna have done so much for this South Korea team throughout the years, even though they go in as once again the mainstay duo here on the tiebreaker, this single play is what matters. This single play from the German squad, 3 members over that 300k mark, bring them into the grand finals against the United States for the second time in this tournament, for the second time in 2 years.
It was an emotional and heartfelt send-off for Flying Tuna, who goes without saying is one of the greatest tournament players of all time. And while his journey would end with heartbreak for now, he had to be proud of what he accomplished. And the same goes for the rest of the team, as they grew into one of the most fun teams to support through the years with amazing talent. But moving forward, they had so many problems to address. They were losing Tuna, Doomsday Fanboy, Karuna, and others that were heading to the military or were focusing more on their personal lives. No one knew what to think of the future of this team. They had 1 full year to figure things out, but how could you recover from such a loss in such a short amount of time? How could they possibly find someone to fill the massive shoes Tuna would leave after his departure? Luckily, the answers to all those questions would arrive quickly, and they didn't have to look far to find someone else to lead this team. Karcher is a South Korean OSU player and mapper who first created his account on December 30th, 2017. He was first introduced to the game by his friend Meggy. However, for the first year and a half after creating his account, he barely played the game because he didn't find too much enjoyment at first. But in 2019, after watching anime for the first time, he decided to make a return to OSU. And on May 1st, 2019, Karcher started playing OSU seriously, and he hasn't looked back since. His play count immediately went from 0 to the mid-high thousands, and naturally with how much he played the game, he improved at a rapid pace. In fact, things started out so good that Karcher was well in the 4-digit ranks within his first 4 months of actively playing the game. Starting out, his best scores were mostly aim-oriented, and in search of a change, 2020 was the year Karcher dedicated himself to rounding off his skill set while specializing in streams. He looked up to players like BTMC and Iki who can consistently hit streams like it was nothing, and so he sought to become just like them. And while this would normally be a transition that would take a lot of time for players to implement successfully, Karcher took this change in stride and managed to thrive with it. By September 2020, Karcher was able to set plays above the 700 PP mark, and his skill set in this type developed so nicely that he was able to make it onto the South Korean roster for the 2020 OSU World Cup. But ultimately, he and the rest of his team would exit the tournament at an unamusing 7th to 8th place. Karcher was mostly absent in South Korea's OWC 2020 run, especially in the later stages of the tournament, and so he used this as motivation to continue the grind in 2021. Karcher's continued improvement allowed him to reach the top 100 in May 2021, but his endeavors in solo play was not the only progress he would make, as he now entered tournaments as a completely refined player. Karcher's tournament skill set and results would drastically improve in 2021, with the most notable of these tournament places coming at OSU Korean Tournament 2021, where he would finish 2nd, only losing to Flying Tuna twice, but not before taking 1 set off of him in grand finals. With the massive upward trajectory he was on, Karcher was more than deserving of a spot in South Korea's OWC 2021 roster, where after a magical 6-set run through the losers bracket, he and his team would place 3rd, giving him his first ever OSU tournament badge. There were many moments Karcher shined at the 2021 OSU World Cup, but there was one glaring problem he needed to address. In South Korea's losses against the United Kingdom and Germany, Karcher put up rather meddling scores in the tiebreaker maps. Whether it was nerves or lack of tournament experience, he needed to improve his play to allow himself to rise up and perform in these big moments. After all, it could be the difference between winning and losing on OSU's biggest stages. Thankfully, that was something he could work on in preparation for the 2022 OSU World Cup next year. That was, if he could even play next year. Alongside Flying Tuna and Doomsday Fanboy, Karcher was slated to start his impending military service and would miss the 2022 OSU World Cup. This was rather unfortunate timing, as the prime of his playing career would prematurely be interrupted without a chance at redemption. He initially was able to push back his departure date after getting sick, but that that didn't change the fact that he wasn't able to play in OWC. That was until he got sick again and was able to postpone his military service to 2023. Out of nowhere, Karcher was now on borrowed time and now had the opportunity to put all his efforts into making 2022 his best year yet. And with that opportunity, he would seize the spotlight for himself as he would put together one of the best years by an individual player that Osu had ever seen. Karcher would become a demon in the tournament scene as he was now fully capable of winning badges against the best players in the game on his lonesome, with his best win coming at Osu Korean Tournament 2022, where he established himself as the best tournament player in South Korea. And the main thing that garnered everyone's attention was that Karcher turned into one of the clutchest players the game had ever seen. In particular, Karcher was able to end two of Osu's most insurmountable curses that plagued the community for years. The first was a bounty for one of the most cursed maps in Osu history, Tokido's Yomiuri. Ever since the map was ranked in 2017, there was not a single player that could find the resolve to FC it. Many people have gotten close, but just couldn't quite complete the FC. In fact, the map had gone so long without an FC that people started to get impatient and began to offer money to be claimed by the player who would get the first FC. Initially, there was $100 on the line in April 2021, but then this bounty would soon get out of hand, with a series of donations bringing this bounty to an insane $3,333 for the first FC. To say that this was the most expensive bounty in Osu history would be a massive understatement, as these developments turned into something beyond meme status. If anything, the money turned out to be a massive inhibitor. Try as they might, no one could complete the FC in light of the added pressure the bounty brings. That was until Karcher came along. On July 4th, 2022, Karcher would break the curse of Yomiuri and set the very first FC to claim the $3,333. Or at least that's what everyone thought. All Osu bounties require a recording or live stream with a hand cam to be claimed, which Karcher forgot to do. This mistake could have potentially cost him the entire bounty, but instead of panicking, the dude turned on his hand cam, FC'd the map again the very next day, and finally put an end to one of the biggest curses in Osu history, all while netting a huge payday in the process. This, on top of many other incredible scores that he would set, allowed him to be voted by the community as the number 4 best Osu player of 2022. To think that none of this would have happened if he didn't find a way out of the military was a crazy butterfly effect that very much worked for the better. But Osu's newfound Curse Destroyer didn't earn that placement with just his endeavors in solo play. Narratives entering the 2022 Osu World Cup were a bit interesting in contrast to previous years. It was widely accepted that the winner was going to be one of the top 4 seeds of the tournament, a massive increase in parity to the years where only 1 or 2 teams had a real shot. South Korea sat just outside that top 4 threshold as they entered the tournament as the 5th seed with a roster consisting of no KJK, Karcher, Orsay Char Player, Amamiya Kokoro, Allegrissimo, Parisia, Zayson, and Nongsa. They had a talented roster, that was for sure, but filling the large shoes that Flying Tuna left in light of his absence was no easy task. They needed someone new to take the role of a true tournament carry, and lucky for them, Karcher was the one who was ready for those challenges. 2 5-0 sweeps on Spain and China allowed South Korea to cruise into winners quarterfinals, where they would face the 4th seeded Canada, one of the prospects to take the entire tournament. Canada had long been knocking on the door of title contention, with the roster being super consistent over the past few years. Since 2018, Canada has always made it to the top 6 of OWC, peaking with a 3rd place finish in 2020. Their tight-knit chemistry, their star players, and their incredible consistency over the past few years made them one of the scariest teams to face. And with that in mind, it wasn't a shock that they would be sitting at match point against South Korea with a 5-2 lead and a double breakpoint advantage.
The Hard Rock 2 gambit on the mapping style does not pay off for South Korea. They lose it by 160,000 score to Canada, who now are on match point with the next pick, poised to close this out 6-2.
It looked like they were going to take easy care of SK, who were once again on the verge of an early trip to the losers bracket. Over the past few years, all of their winners bracket runs were complete duds. They have not won a winners bracket match beyond the round of 16 in 6 years, and sadly, it seemed like that stretch would continue. Winning 4 maps in a row against Canada with only 1 map pick to fall back on felt like way too much to ask for. But before they could even think of completing the comeback, they first needed to get their heads back into this match. They would show some semblance of life as they would chip away at the lead thanks to an FC from Parisia on DT1 to take one of the breakpoints back. Their final pick on Hidden 2 got dicey, but they would just narrowly edge out Canada thanks to an FC from Nope KJK to keep their hopes alive. This win brought the match to 5-4, but they were still on the ropes. South Korea had no more map picks left at their disposal as Canada was set to pick once again to try and close out the match on their own terms. In addition, they had no answers for Zudinator, who was on fire in this match, FCing 4 of the last 5 maps. The only way to counter someone consistently putting up ridiculous scores of this magnitude was to put up scores like that of your own, and it was at this moment where Karcher would orchestrate an absolute masterclass.
South Korea are going to pull this all the way back from 5-2 down.
It was so far down.
And it's now going to go to a tiebreaker. Karcher is just absolutely crazy.
today. You know, I talked about Karcher having a great start to this match and maybe stepping back a little bit in performance in the latter half, but man, does Karcher step up exactly when he needs to.
After annihilating Canada's Hard Rock 3 pick with an FC to allow South Korea to stave off elimination once again and force a 5-5 tiebreaker situation, the tiebreaker map came down to a battle of nerves between two of the most resilient players in the game. It was Udinator versus Karcher to decide the fate of this chaotic match. The first one to break loses, and for a moment, it felt like the world stopped as the OSU community witnessed the performance of a lifetime.
A long time. There goes Udinator. If it wasn't already over, it's certainly over now. South Korea are going to do it. This is going to be the completion of an incredible comeback from 5-2 down to win 3 match points in your face in a row, go to tiebreaker, and maybe pull out an FC as Karcher continues to hold.
What is happening? It's the slow slider! Oh my god, Archer is making this map look like a 6-star tiebreaker. Oh my gosh. Oh, worst HR player broke again.
Don't do this, Karcher. You are not allowed to FC this tiebreaker after we talked up how difficult it was for the entire interim period between the last map and this one. This is not allowed.
Oh my god. Are we sure Faker is at Worlds and not here right now? Oh my god. Oh my god.
He did it. Oh, he did it.
Oh my god. It doesn't matter. He did it. No, he did it.
Oh,
He slider.
Alright, well, I guess Karcher's human.
Karcher seized this pressure-filled moment for himself as he iced the match with an absolutely monstrous score on the tiebreaker, giving South Korea a 6-5 victory when all hope seemed lost and completing the comeback that no one saw coming. While Karcher's heroics were irreplaceable, massive props needed to go to the rest of his teammates who provided vital support when it mattered the most. It was a team effort on all fronts, and now everyone knew that this South Korean roster was a force to be reckoned with. For the first time since 2016, South Korea was able to make it past the quarterfinals without losing a single match, and now in winners semis they would be facing... oh no.
The United States team, obviously reigning champions, have been for about 5 years now. Having this matchup in the semis is kind of messed up, all things considered.
South Korea went from completing an impossible comeback to now facing an even more impossible matchup as now they had to go against the United States once again. The very same team that snatched their crown as the greatest team ever and boasted an undefeated record against them. The US were by far the greatest bracket demon and were fully fresh off of 4 straight OWC victories. Although they were rolling with arguably their weakest roster in recent times, they were still undeniable favorites to win OWC and without a doubt the scariest team to face in any stage of the tournament. Many respected the effort South Korea made to get to this point, but many thought they had even less of a chance compared to their match against Canada in the week prior. After all, the United States had never lost a match in 4 years and they showed no signs of stopping anytime soon. But all streaks end eventually, so maybe, just maybe, it could happen. Both teams started out trading map wins to get to a 2-2 tie, but the United States would be the ones to take the first break point of the match, and they would hold on to that advantage to eventually reach match point with a 5-3 lead.
I feel for Karcher. That man is having an outrageous match. And unfortunately, the USA just has a better team, and so his efforts are going to naught.
Once again, South Korea needed to pull off an improbable comeback to keep their best winners bracket run going. Solid all-around team performances were keeping them afloat, but when you're going up against a team as strong as the US, sometimes you just get shut down and there's nothing you can do about it, and this match was no different. A lot of their best performances would just get suffocated by the US, but they still had a fighting chance. In a must-win situation once again, their final pick of the match on Hard Rock 3 saw Karcher holding onto an FC to extend the match and keep the team's hopes alive, but Utami wasn't going to let SK take the win for free. This map came down to a 1v1 between each team's superstar, and for South Korea's sake, it was once again on Karcher to hold his nerve.
The ending is so volatile too, with the slider aim. There goes Alagrisimo, the first drop. Utami trades it immediately after the FC is gone, and just like that, South Korea 5-4.
Karcher just holds the FC. That man is on a mission for South Korea. Unbelievable. Another FC.
He is on a tear, and there is no signs of stopping him.
Unbelievable.
It got scary, but Karcher held on to set his 5th FC of the match and keep his team in it. The score was now 5-4 in favor of the US, but just like against Canada, South Korea had to steal one last break point in order to force the tiebreaker. The US went with Hidden 3 to try and put an end to this match, but that pick proved to be a disastrous mistake. South Korea would completely demolish them thanks to an FC from Worst HR player and great support from Note KJK. And once again, the tiebreaker was the only thing separating South Korea from yet another incredible comeback. The stakes this time around were very much different. Not only was South Korea trying to get into winners finals for the first time ever, not only were they trying to quell their bracket demons and notch their first victory against the US in team history, but they were looking to be the ones to end the United States' historic winning streak at OWC. They had not lost a single match dating all the way back to the grand finals of the 2018 Osu World Cup against the United Kingdom. Now they were one map away from entering the losers bracket prior to the finals weekend. And if that were to happen, they would be in their worst position in the OWC bracket since 2014. No matter the outcome of this final map, we would be witnessing history. Either Osu's greatest super team will add to their already demonic legacy, or South Korea will end the longest winning streak in Osu history. With how evenly these two teams were matched, it seemed like the team that flinches first would pay for it dearly. And against all odds, the team to falter was the team that long felt invincible.
Advantage to South Korea here. Oh my god, how many of those were real breaks?
We're gonna see here, but if they're real, that's Utami Takedo and Rectigon. Zace and Worst HR player both breaking. But it's
I think those were all real breaks. Those were real breaks. Parisia and Karcher are the only FCs remaining right now.
Karcher and Parisia were now the only FCs while the United States lost all of theirs instantaneously. All South Korea had to do was hang on and history would be made, and they tried their best to hold on to the score lead for dear life. But in the meantime, Takedo was hot on their heels as the United States' last chance to keep their indomitable streak alive.
This combo from Takedo is still keeping the United States in this game, and as long as he holds that, any miss from the Korean side is going to matter just that much more.
Oh my, we're coming down to the wire here. And there goes Takedo, he breaks, that might be it.
But it wasn't to last as he would soon fall, and now South Korea were set to do the impossible. And for a brief moment of time, it felt like the Osu world as we knew it was being reformed right in front of our very eyes.
Nothing on the side of the United States outside of Rectigon and Fancy Lad right now as we get into the ending of this map. Is there enough time? Worst HR player drops, Sison drops, Rectigon drops, Parisia and Karcher still holding on to the combos. I think South Korea have just done the impossible. They have taken the United States down to the losers bracket for the first time since 2018 Grand Finals. The United States, the reigning champions, are now facing elimination in the finals weekend.
South Korea, 2 weeks in a row. These comeback victories that look impossible, they make them possible. Karcher just goes off on these maps, and the backing combos were there whenever they needed them. The upset of the year, anybody beating the United States is going to be an incredible upset, but in a fashion like that, from 5-3 down to win 3 maps in a row to send the USA down to losers bracket, I mean, that is just a script that you would take to Hollywood.
History was made as Osu's most infallible record was no more, as South Korea became the first team to take the match against the United States at the Osu World Cup in 1,428 days. 2 matches in a row, they found themselves in dire straits. But they pulled off the crazy comeback both times to prevail when many thought it was impossible. Each and every one of their players lit up the match lobby when the light shined brightest, and thanks to the collective effort of their entire team, their best winners bracket run continued as they made it to the winners finals for the first time in team history with a guaranteed top 3 finish. There, they would come across Germany, a familiar foe and the same team that ended their magical run in the year prior. Even after all they had been through thus far, South Korea were still seen as the underdogs in this match, as many people now expected Germany to take the tournament after the unexpected losses from Canada and the US in the weeks prior. But everyone's intuition would be horribly exposed once again, as South Korea would put any lingering doubts anyone had of them to rest with a crushing 7-3 victory over Germany.
They're going to go to their first winners bracket final, from the winners side in almost 10 years. South Korea, it's been so long coming, but they're the dominant force, and they're going to be the final boss of the tournament in the grand finals from winner's side.
South Korea were in the winner's side of grand finals for the first time in the double elimination era, all while surviving one of the most difficult brackets any team had to face in OWC history. They took down the number 4, number 1, and number 3 teams of the tournament in back-to-back-to-back weeks, completing epic comebacks against 2 of them, ending Osu's most historic winning streak, and making the last of their opposition look completely lost in rapid succession as they seized full control of the biggest stage Osu has to offer. Throughout the course of the entire tournament, they were counted out by many. They were the only ones to seem to have faith in themselves, but soon they turned everyone into a believer for the championship cause. They waited for their opponent to emerge from the losers bracket, and of course, it would be none other than the United States as the last hurdle they needed to climb to finally reach the summit. One more match win was the only thing between them and ending their 9-year championship drought to cap off one of the most legendary runs in OWC history. And in the ultimate reversal of fate, it wasn't the United States that were favored to win this grand finals matchup. The same team that had cemented themselves as the most most dominant force Osu had ever seen, were no longer the favorites, as the Osu community believe in the resurrected strength of South Korea to win it all. They were nowhere close to being the favorites entering this tournament. Many thought their opposition would be too much to handle as time progressed, but when many expected them to fall, they proved everyone wrong on numerous occasions, and now it felt like they had all the power in the world to do it once again. But when all hopes were at their highest, everyone's expectations would soon be sent crashing back down to reality.
Your champions, once again, United States.
5 years in a row. 2018, 19, 20, 2021, and now 2022.
The United States roster heard all the noise and turned this grand final into a complete wash, with a 7-1 win in the first match and a 7-4 win in the bracket reset to take the tournament and their 5th OWC title in a row. They left absolutely no breathing room for South Korea, where they most notably had a stretch where they won 8 maps in a row between both sets of grand finals. It was clear that they took their loss in the semifinals very personally. They completed a 5-match losers bracket run that saw them boast a map record of a decimating 35-10, as they showed that even at their worst, they were still far and away the best team in the world. For South Korea, they once again fell short to the team that ruled the scene after their own distant era. Once again, they just couldn't beat the US when it mattered the most, as their championship aspirations would fall one step short. Even with the loss, they had to be proud of themselves. No one expected them to make it this far, and following their journey this year evoked feelings unlike any other. It's crazy to think that none of this would have happened if Karcher didn't get sick a few times. If he didn't get sick, he instead would have went away for his military service, which meant the lifeblood of this South Korean roster would have been gone. And without his efforts, we wouldn't have witnessed the most historic development to ever take place on Osu's biggest stage. But now all of that was over, and it was time to face the music. With Karcher's plans to head to his looming military service once and for all, the future of this team was once again uncertain. Once again, they needed someone to take the mantle as their unbreakable superstar, but just like last time, they didn't need to look far to find them. Forum, also known as Worst HR Player, is a Korean Osu player who first heard about Osu when he saw his brother play the game. His brother wouldn't dabble in the game too much and ended up quitting, but curious and with the opportunity to finally experience the game for himself, Worst HR Player created his Osu account on March 17th, 2019. And little did we know it at the time, but that fateful day would be the start of the playing career for a prodigy unlike any other. It was immediately clear that Worst HR Player had one of the fastest improvement rates among Osu's most legendary names, as he was able to make it to the top 5,000 after just a year of playing in July 2020. A few months later, however, his play count would take a significant decline. It was around this time that Worst HR Player's rank was decaying, and at the same time, his motivation for the game was falling along with it. But shortly after, his play count would hit the highest numbers in his playing career, and with it came a new extraordinary rank surge. It was around this time that he made the switch from a 60Hz monitor to a 165Hz monitor. Prior to this upgrade, Worst HR Player struggled with reading approach rates above 10, but the new monitor not only allowed him to finally dabble into DT farming, but it was the catalyst for a motivational renaissance, and in turn, his fastest rise up the ranks in his young but remarkable playing career. Ever since getting that new monitor, he put a heavy emphasis on maximizing his DT abilities, with his primary focus being gaining PP and climbing the Osu rankings. From that day forward, he'd play DT maps every single day, and it was with that dedication that he would go from stagnating inside the top 5,000 in December 2020 to reaching the 3-digit ranks in February 2021. What he was able to do in that 3-month span was nothing short of incredible, yet it doesn't get talked about too often. But that might be because what he would do in the time that followed would completely overshadow the anomaly of his blazing fast improvement. If one were to just look at his top plays at the time, it would be easy to simply call him a DT aim one trick. But in the midst of his DT score setting surge, Worst HR Player invested time in other skill sets to improve his general consistency and further refine his skill set. His growth as an all-around player would show as a result of his efforts. But by far the most defining improvements that he would make in this time was with tech maps. Worst HR Player would define a niche of his own in the form of ludicrous tech plays, and especially ones that required intensive amounts of aim control. It doesn't need to be explained just how hard excelling at a skill set like this is. Just take a look at some of the plays he set, and that's all you need to know. And with how ludicrous these plays were, it didn't take long for plays of this nature to become synonymous with Worst HR Player's name. And the craziest part about this was that all of this happened within his first 2 years of playing the game. The word prodigy often gets thrown around a lot in the realm of competition, but Worst HR Player was without a doubt the real deal. And if he kept at it, there was no telling how far he would go. Many were excited to see his future growth, but there were a handful of others that were skeptical. Worst HR Player's recent surge in tech and aim control centric scores would lead to this post in r/Osu report that accused him of cheating, with these accusations being mainly based on suspicion without evidence, and after a few live plays from Worst HR Player to clear his name, these accusations would be dismissed as nothing more than a distraction. But keep this sort of thing in mind for later. The massive strides he would make in his play made him a desirable piece that could mesh well with South Korea's roster for the 2021 Osu World Cup. But when their roster was announced, Worst HR Player was nowhere to be found. Why would they leave a budding star like him off the roster? Well, it was because Worst HR Player just simply did not try out. Despite his talents and his rapid fast improvement, Worst HR Player lacked confidence in his tournament play. He unfortunately struggled with terrible performance anxiety, society, and was upset with the lack of his overall tournament consistency at this time. The most devastating nail in the coffin for him was with regard to his performance at Old Map Fantasy World Cup. He would perform solidly for a fresh face in the tournament scene, ultimately being part of a South Korean squad that ended up placing second, only behind... well, isn't that an evil coincidence? But behind the scenes of his play, including some moments where he would completely take over the maps he played in, he was unhappy with his lingering inconsistencies. Not only that, but he couldn't really play maps with hard rock at the standards he'd set for himself, which is probably where his self-deprecating username comes from. He had the skills and the dedication necessary to become one of the best, but the mental hurdle he faced was undoubtedly the toughest obstacle he had to face. But with some time, he was able to slowly mend those issues. In 2022, Worst HR Player became the best version of himself in the world of solo play. He was able to break into the 1000 PP club for the very first time and continue to set incredible tech scores to set the Osu world ablaze. One of his scores in particular, his FC on Exit the Earth Atmosphere, was so iconic it was a central theme to Osu's 2022 Rewind. His outstanding play that year allowed him to be voted as the number 10 best Osu player by the community with nothing but potential to ascend even further. As far as his tournament nerves were concerned, Worst HR Player was able to win his first tournament badge at Korean Duo Cup 2022, and although he still felt extremely nervous about his performances, he found the resolve to try out for South Korea's OWC team, where he would make his debut at OWC 2022 and was finally able to prove that his rise was no fluke on the biggest stage the game has to offer. He, alongside Karcher, formed one of the most unstoppable duos in Osu World Cup history. Following his addition to the roster, South Korea took down 3 of the top 4 teams of the tournament and snapped the United States' 4-year-long match winning streak in the process. Worst HR Player and his team were miraculously able to make it to the grand finals, but were unfortunately defeated by the US twice to finish in second place. But even with that heartbreaking loss, there was still so much for forum fans to be excited for. By year's end, Worst HR Player was one of the most unique and exciting players to watch with a skill set that dominated on his own volition. Yet he still possessed massive potential to grow. And when 2023 rolled around, Worst HR Player took all that potential and would ascend to a level far beyond anyone's comprehension. There is a reason why Worst HR Player draws comparisons to Faker, and it was by no means a far-fetched metaphor. That's because not only are they both touted South Korean superstars at their respective games, but also because at their very best, they can reach a level unmatched by everyone else. Worst HR Player would deliver on the high promise of his talents, adding 5 more tournament badges to his name and growing into one of, if not the best Osu tournament player in the world. His legacy cementing performance came at Hyeok Cup 6 in the losers finals, where he would turn the map pool into an absolute joke. He didn't just lead his team to a dominating 8-0 sweep, and he wasn't just the best player in the match lobby. His performances were so otherworldly, they looked like a typo. He played in 6 maps, top scored his team all 6 times he played, and finished no lower than second overall on each map, all while soloing the opposing team on numerous occasions. You can't control a match like how much Worst HR dominated this one, but that's just the type of performances that he made possible all on his lonesome. Worst HR Player was one of the scariest players to face in a tournament setting, but what truly separated him from everyone else was his ridiculously high ceiling in the tournament scene, and that would be on full display at the 2023 Osu World Cup. South Korea's roster was primed for top-tier contention, with Worst HR Player leading the way, although there was an interesting dynamic that loomed over this team. Throughout this video, I have highlighted 3 incredible Osu players who single-handedly jump-started the new age South Korean OWC roster to title contention, namely Flying Tuna, Karcher, and now Worst HR Player. In their peak years, these 3 ascended to tournament superstardom, with Tuna doing so in the years from 2019 to 2021, Karcher making the impossible believable in 2022, and 2023 being the year of Worst HR Player's ludicrous reign. But even with the overlap of their primes, there was not a single year that these 3 players were able to play each other on the same OWC roster. Tuna and Karcher made it to South Korea's 2021 OWC team, but as mentioned before, Worst HR Player did not try out for the team and was therefore absent from the roster. In 2022, Karcher and Worst HR Player ran through OWC as an unbreakable duo, but that year, Tuna couldn't play due to his military service. Now in 2023, it was Worst HR Player and Tuna that were set to play together for the first time, but now it was Karcher that would be sitting out as he was set to leave for the military. All 3 of them have or will have played with each other at one point or another, but never at the same time. It was an absolute travesty that South Korea's roster strength would be completely neutered by external factors, especially military service requirements. But out of nowhere, a miracle chance arose for the South Korean roster. Somehow, someway, Karcher managed to dodge the military for the 3rd time, which allowed him to play alongside Tuna and Worst HR Player in 2023. And with that, their trifecta was finally assembled. The 3 players that rejuvenated South Korea's Osu culture to thrive in Osu's modern era were on the same team once and for all, and complementing their roster with some of the best support pieces any team could ask for. The roster South Korea put together in 2023 was a behemoth. Not only did they have their 3 superstars in Flying Tuna, Karcher, and Worst HR players previously mentioned, but their additions of Restia, Amamiya Kokoro, Allegrissimo, Spectre, and Parisia is what truly pushed this team into a brand new realm. This team was so stacked that South Korea qualified as the #1 seed. For the first time in a decade, they entered OWC as the true favorites to win it all, and if there was a time for them to finally make it happen, this year was the year. No one knew what their roster would look like in the future. Absolutely everything had to go right for this team to be assembled in the first place, and it was likely that many of their players would step away from the game in favor of pursuing other endeavors by tournament's end. But with how everything worked out in their favor, they could put all of their efforts into making 2023 their all-or-nothing run. This felt like their last dance. However, it wasn't just them that was vying for the OWC crown, as the 2023 OSR World Cup had levels of parity that OSR World had never seen before. And as a direct result of that parity, OWC 2023 was one of, if not the most unpredictable renditions of the OSR World Cup ever. Many teams with great expectations saw an untimely demise, while other teams that often went overlooked put together incredible runs that no one saw coming. By the end of the quarterfinals, the bracket was in complete chaos. The #2 seeded Poland took a shocking upset loss to Australia thanks to Emmerich heroics. The #4 seeded Russia lost to a Philippines roster that reached an all-time high. And perhaps the most shocking and monumental movement, the 3rd seeded United States got completely annihilated by Canada after they themselves shocked Germany in the week prior. 3 of the top 4 seeded teams and the defending 1st and 3rd placing teams in last year's OWC were sent to the losers bracket before the semifinals even started, and everyone's pick'ems were thrown out the window as the tournament delved into complete chaos. But amidst all those twists and turns, there was one team that seemed to weather the storm. South Korea made their journey through the OWC bracket look like a cakewalk as they quickly dismantled their first 3 opponents to make it to winners semifinals, becoming the only top 4 seed to do so. Having a team with 8 players that can completely take over any map at any time made things a breeze for them. But even with the immense amount of talent on their roster, there was one player that stood among the rest, and it was none other than Worst HR player. He had the highest match cost among his teammates in their first 3 matches of the tournament. It was safe to say that the tournament nerves he experienced not too long ago were completely gone, as now it was his time to be the driving force South Korea needs to finally break their dry spell. Their opponent in winter semis was the 5th seeded Philippines, who had a lot of momentum at their disposal after scoring an upset victory against Russia in the quarterfinals. The Philippines had not seen much success at the OSR World Cup prior to this point, but they finally reached a brand new peak in 2023. Prior to this year, they had never made it inside the top 8 at OWC, but now they were guaranteed their best finish in team history with a guaranteed spot in the top 6. But with the overwhelming amount of talent on the South Korean roster, many expected an easy win for SK. After all, they entered this match as the 93% pick'em favorites. Surely they—
South Korea's road to a victory here in the semifinals looks all but paved over by the Philippines here.
In yet another shocking turn of events the 2023 OSR World Cup had seen to this point, South Korea looked dead lost as the Philippines stormed out to a quick 4-1 lead with a double breakpoint advantage. They were poised to add even more chaos to an already hectic tournament thus far, and South Korea were clinging onto a thread. They needed a response, and fast. They couldn't afford to go into the losers bracket where many of the strongest teams already found themselves lurking in. They would take one of the breakpoints back to cut the lead to 4-2, but it still felt like they needed a massive spark to get themselves back into the match. In hopes of reigniting their roster, South Korea spent their second to last pick on Hard Rock 3, Blue Zenith. Yes, the same exact Blue Zenith that started Osu's infamous 727 meme and was the PP record all the way back in 2016 in the midst of Cookiezi's prime. Even though the map was old, it was still a map that only the best stream players in the game could FC with Hard Rock. A map with one of the richest histories in the game was now the battlegrounds at the highest level of play on Osu's brightest stage. Now that it made its way into the OWC map pool, players were now forced to do whatever they can to do their best on this map with immense amount of pressure. And knowing that the entirety of the OSR world is watching every move you make, FCs in a position like this simply do not happen. But Worst HR player was already familiar with bending reality at his will, and when his team needed it most, he would do so once again.
The streak from Worst HR player, he's the one combo you have to stay alive here for South Korea. We're going to the next final Kiai, the ending of this map, 400,000 score separating them. There's still a chance with these chain miss potential here, but Henry drops. That has to be solidified now for South Korea. Worst HR player leading the charge. The spaciest streams of the map here coming through. Can Worst HR player close it out? One of the best scores that could suffice in this tournament. Hit the jumps. Worst HR player, you are a beast. How do you do it? The best score in this map by far! The best score maybe of the tournament!
With his back against the wall in the semifinals of the biggest tournament of the year, Forum dropped possibly the best score in OWC history with a Hard Rock FC on Blue Zenith. The name worst HR player sat there as the most blatant oxymoron as Faker had arrived at the Osu World Cup and gave South Korea the burst of momentum they needed. This statement map win was the forefront of 5 consecutive maps that SK would win to turn their 1-4 deficit into a 6-4 victory to secure a top 3 finish and a trip to winners finals for the 2nd year in a row. It didn't come easy, but this win showed the fortitude of this team and their unrelenting resolve to do whatever it takes to win. And high off the momentum of their most important match win yet, they would face off against Australia with a trip to the winner's side of Grand Finals on the line. Australia were on the run of a lifetime. They were guaranteed their best ever finish at the Osu World Cup, secured their first OWC top 3 badge in team history, and most impressively, they did all of that as the 7th seed and took out many of Osu's strongest teams in the process. They put together by far the best Cinderella story of the tournament. Another win would add yet another chapter to their illustrious miracle run, but unfortunately, only one of these two teams could advance. And with a 7-3 victory in favor of South Korea, they would find themselves in the winner's side of Grand Finals in back-to-back years. Once again, they were one match win away from ending the winless curse, a curse that has persisted for 10 years now. And now, more than ever, it looked like it was finally their time. They boasted a monstrous 29-8 map record in a year many teams were expected to contend for the OWC title, all while beating many of the best teams of the tournament in the process. Worst HR player was lights out, putting up many dominating performances and coming through in huge moments as he emerged as South Korea's one true ace. The rest of their team performed as advertised, and their roster stood on a level beyond comprehension. Everything was too good for them to not see it through until the end. As they waited for their opponent to emerge from the losers bracket once again, they were sure to be everyone's pick to win this chaotic tournament. This trifecta that changed the culture of their team forever. The same exact team that had been fighting for their place at the top for so long was now primed to make it work in spite of all the chaotic events that transpired. And the last team that would be standing in their way from fulfilling that destiny was them. While South Korea survived the winners bracket journey to make it to the Grand Finals, the United States faced the absolute worst position they had to deal with at any OWC ever. But even though they were handed an early trip to the losers bracket, they rallied off 5 match wins in a row against Sweden, Poland, the Philippines, Germany, and Australia. They defeated the 23rd, 2nd, 5th, 6th, and 7th seeds of the tournament all in a row in destructive fashion. And if they were to find a way to beat South Korea twice, just like as they had done in the year prior, they would win their 6th OWC title in a row, 8th overall, and complete the longest and most treacherous losers bracket run in Osu World Cup history. The Osu World was treated to yet another South Korea versus United States Grand Finals as the most entertaining OWC to date needed its last chapter to be written. And what ensued was undoubtedly the single greatest tournament match of all time.
The match that everyone has been so eager to see begins now. South Korea, United States. You know the drill. You know the history of these two teams. And we are starting off with pick from South Korea on the free mod 3. This is some demon levels of aim requirement here. You can already see it. Extremely difficult, regardless of what really you're running.
The United States quickly struck first, opening the Grand Finals with a breakpoint on the first map of the match. And after both teams traded their map picks for a bit, the United States lead stood at 3-2 with their pick up next. It was at that point where they would pick DT4 Scarlet Rose. Historically, the US had a stranglehold on the DT maps in the OWC map pool, especially in the later stages, and this year was no different. The United States played in 13 DT maps throughout the course of the tournament thus far, and lost only 3 of them. And scariest of all, up to this point, they flaunted a 7-1 DT map record in the finals and grand final stage of this year's OWC. One of those wins came against South Korea earlier in this grand final, and it was an absolute blowout. But on Scarlet Rose, South Korea was on the verge of stealing a DT breakpoint from the US, an outcome that seemed impossible, especially considering the United States track record on the DT map pool.
So many drops here, but Rectagon and Vaxxer still holding. This 20,000 could still close in. USA are going to take the lead. And this is going to be it for sure. Vaxxer may go down, but Rectagon still stands. It seemed like South Korea had it towards the late stages, but that hardest section led to the most tremendous drops.
It was so nearly the break point that South Korea needed, but they just could not keep it together into the ending.
But unfortunately, their efforts were ultimately not enough, and although they put up a respectable fight, they would find themselves down 2-4. But considering the amount of pressure they put on the US on a skill set that seemed extremely one-sided, they were sure to keep this performance in the back of their minds. South Korea would then win their Hard Rock 3 pick thanks to a classic worst HR player carry to cut the deficit to 3-4. And from here on out, both teams proceeded to blunder their map picks. South Korea would end up tying things up at 4 apiece after stomping the US on their Hard Rock 2 pick led by Allegrisima and Amamiya Kokoro, but then lost their Nomad 1 pick thanks to an FC from Rectagon to give the United States their lead and breakpoint advantage right back. The US then went with Hard Rock 1, but then Karcher would respond with an FC of his own to tie things up yet again. With the match now tied 5-all, South Korea then lost the final pick of the match on Nomad 4 by a slim margin, marking the 4th consecutive breakpoint conceded by both teams. Finally, the United States were finally able to close things out on their own pick, winning the match 7-5 and forcing the bracket reset to be played. Even though this was the 3rd Grand Finals match in a row that South Korea would drop to the US, this was the first on many fronts for them. This was by far the best fight to put up against them in the Grand Finals, and more importantly, they knew exactly where to attack the US with the info they gathered. And with that in mind, they would proceed to start out the bracket reset with a bang.
But it's actually a DT4 first pick for South Korea. This is super surprising as a first pick. USA won this in the first round of Grand Finals. They granted by 37k, but this is a pick that South Korea lost last time around. So this is a super surprising first pick.
South Korea would open the bracket reset match by picking Scarlet Rose right out the gate. And even though they were close to winning it in the first match of Grand Finals, it still came as a massive shock to the commentators, and for good reason. In 2023, teams only dared to pick DT against the US 5 times, and succeeded in winning their own DT pick against them just once. In fact, teams were so scared of playing DT against the US that out of the 10 opponents they faced, 7 of them banned a DT map against them. This included South Korea doing so twice in the first match of Grand Finals and now in the bracket reset. To put it simply, picking DT against the US in any capacity was never and has never been a good idea. But South Korea had a plan, and they rode this bold action to shock the US, taking a DT pick on their terms and their first ever lead across both matches of the Grand Finals.
South Korea reading it right, the confidence pick working out here on Scarlet Rose.
Even though it was just the first map, it was a resounding victory for South Korea. They proved that at their best, they could neutralize the most polarizing strength the US had over them. But the United States quickly returned to their dominant selves in the DT pool to tie the match 1-1 on their DT3 pick. And it was from this point onwards that this match would spiral into complete madness. Both teams would once again trade 4 break points in a row, ultimately bringing the match to a 3-3 tie with neither team being able to gain a significant advantage. This brought us to map 7, and it was here that this grand final would reach its ultimate crescendo as South Korea would pick Hard Rock 3 Burning Star. South Korea picked this map in the first match of the Grand Finals, and Worst HR player made light work of it last time. The map was perfect for his one-of-a-kind skill set, but the longer this Grand Final carried out, the tension would only continue to grow as map wins became increasingly vital. A win for either side in this pivotal moment could make or break their championship ambitions. With their tournament lives on the line on the biggest stage Osu has to offer against the greatest team in Osu history, South Korea's championship hopes rested once again on Worst HR player. The same player who suffered from serious performance anxiety was trusted to elevate his nation to new heights. And with all that attention and emphasis centered around him, he would pay back that trust with gameplay that would break any and all senses of conventionality.
What is he doing? This is a monstrous score from Worst HR player already, and he's cresting 1,000 combo. He's the only one who can really, truly pop off on this map, and he's gonna make full advantage of it. When people call maps forum maps, this is what the hell they're talking about.
What is this score from Worst HR player? The rest of the lobby is falling apart. Backstays the only potential combo they could even fight, consider on. The Worst HR player is blowing the world away. The world is watching an absolutely mesmerizing play. One of the best scores, maybe, of the tournament. 800,000 scoring climbing. Only a little bit left to go. Worst HR player, can you make history with this? This will be the best score of the tournament if you hit this. Worst HR player, hit this ending. Worst HR player, come on. Little bit left to go. Worst HR player.
Oh my god.
1,800 combo and a full combo for Worst HR player. This is truly the pinnacle of Osu World Cup performances.
Faker showed himself once again, and he was back and better than ever before. If you were to check Worst HR player's vital signs, you will struggle to find his blood pressure because there was nothing but ice in his veins. FCs in the OWC Grand Final simply don't happen, but for it to happen on a map like this in such a dire situation, it goes without saying that this is by far the single greatest Osu tournament score the game had ever seen. And with this, it was now 4-3 in South Korea's favor as the roster came alive when it mattered most. In hopes of finding any kind of a response, the US turned to Fremont 2 in hopes of stopping at least some of South Korea's ungodly momentum. But not even their best efforts could halt South Korea's complete takeover of this match as their magical surge would continue, with the role of the Catalyst transferring from one of their stars to another.
There's only a little bit of time left here. Wendell Life, last man standing here for the United States, the lone soldier. You've got Recklon giving a little bit of backup left. This strategy from South Korea might just work. Flying Tuna holding on to the hidden hard rock, tanking as much as he can to give his teammates the boost that they need. Restia, Karcher, can you hold this on to the end? It's slowly flipping towards the end, but it's flickering just barely. Riddled goes down. Giant break. That has to be decided now for South Korea. Karcher and Restia refuse to let this go. They will not back down. And Karcher ends this off with an FC. South Korea alongside Restia and Karcher with the two fantastic scores. Take the strategy that worked so incredibly perfect, exactly as planned. Textbook stuff. South Korea get the biggest breakpoint of the match by far.
This time, it was Karcher's turn to drop a show-stopping FC as South Korea took their biggest lead and their first true advantage of the Grand Finals. Up 5-3, this was the first time they possessed a breakpoint advantage and led by multiple maps in either match of these Grand Finals, and it couldn't have come at a better time as they seized absolute control of the Osu world. The destination was now well in reach. All they had to do was win the remaining map picks and the OWC title would be theirs. They could now taste the glory, but perhaps a bit of that hubris got to them as the United States would immediately correct their downward trajectory by taking the breakpoint right back and tying the match at 5. South Korea now found themselves in the exact same scenario as the first match of Grand Finals, sitting at a 5-5 tie on their final map pick. Previously, they faltered in this situation, but this time around, they looked like they would make up for their mistakes. That was unless Takedo had something to say about it.
Takedo, the only semblance of combo in the whole lobby right now, and even then, he's only 300 combo against a 100,000 plus score lead for South Korea. I dare say it, this is gonna be the point for South Korea. Can they hold on just a little bit longer? Takedo might just be able to bring this back at the end of the map. Flying Tuna is missing as well. It's 50k for the United States now to bring back. Takedo is still going. Can he hold? No, he cannot. He finds the chain miss.
With that miss from Takedo, that is going to be a point for South Korea, and they are 1 point away from being the world champions for the first time in 10 years.
Takedo's comeback efforts turned out to be too little too late, as now with a 6-5 lead, South Korea found themselves at match point. They were now 1 map away from winning the Osu World Cup, 1 map away from completing the run of destiny, 1 map away from ending their decade-long curse that haunted the legacy of their roster, and 1 map away from finally taking down their biggest rivals in the Grand Finals of OWC and exercising their demons once and for all. For once, it was the United States on the back foot as they faced elimination for the first time since 2017, and all they could do is try and defend the crown that South Korea were so close to reclaiming. The US would let their historic streak rest on the Fremont 3 pick, and Boshi Man wouldn't let his team go out so soon. Boshi would close out the United States final pick for his team, and now the outcome of this fated matchup would come down to the tiebreaker. Bonitas by Release Hallucination would be the ultimate decider as these two evenly matched teams fought to a 6-6 scoreline. The 24th and final map of this Grand Final series between South Korea and the United States would decide whether we would see a 10-year-long curse being shattered or the solidification of a dynasty in light of the most competitive year to date.
1 final chapter in the history books. 1 last map. It all comes down to Vanitas.
And starting out on this tiebreaker, South Korea seemed out of it as each and every one of their combos would vanish. The US would find a full combo reset of their own, but not before they took a nice lead to start out. From here, it looked like Karcher was the only one that could potentially save his team from falling even more behind.
Karcher, last man standing here for South Korea with the big combo. Going into this next Hyeok, jumps get really tough here. Cross screen there is hit from Karcher. He's got to hold on to this to try and bring something back for South Korea. 76,000 is quite the deficit on a tiebreaker like this. So many players go down, including Karcher.
But an unfortunate break would solidify the United States lead as all 4 of their players started to rebuild their combos heading into the final quarter of the map. Once again, Karcher was the only one on his team with a sizable combo and was the only hope South Korea had. It was a long shot, but if the US breaks all their combos and Karcher holds on, maybe they could...
Recting on as well on a pretty big combo there, and there goes Karcher. The one big combo for Korea is down, and all of USA is hitting this stream section. All of USA is hitting the 1/3. All of USA is hitting the jumps, and the United States will not be held back.
The harsh reality of competition is that when everything finally comes to an end, we are left with the purest forms of emotion. Many turn their sights to those who emerge victorious, all while the pain of such a tough loss is often left unchecked with feelings too vivid for most to bear. There are no words that can explain just how painful this moment was for South Korea's roster. All the sacrifices made just to get to this point. The many years of falling just short time and time again. Everything that needed to go right just to have a chance in the first place, and getting so close to attaining the end goal you were willing to give up anything just to accomplish, only to have your best chances slip through your fingertips and be ripped away yet again in violent fashion. They were so close, closer than they had ever been for the past decade, yet they would come out empty-handed once again. South Korea did everything right, but in the realm of competition, even if you do everything right, sometimes, for one reason or another, you still just lose. And that's the reality everyone dreads the most. Some stories are best left untold, not just because they're boring or not applicable, but sometimes they are just too real. Sometimes stories carry emotions so strong and heavy, there's no way to tell them without leaving your listeners overwhelmed. The tale of South Korea up to this point is one of those stories. The levels of heartbreak they experienced is simply too much to convey. Even then, life goes on, and everyone aware of such a story has no choice but to move on the best they can. But that's where they have to face the music of another reality they just can't seem to break. In any competition, putting yourself in a position to win is already hard enough. But what's even more difficult is finding your way back there on numerous occasions. South Korea defied the odds many times over and found themselves in top-tier contention for several years in a row. But there comes a time where that hits a breaking point for everyone. And sadly, it seemed like the aftermath of the iconic 2023 OWC Grand Finals for South Korea would quickly set in. There's always the looming issue that all teams have to go through of their players potentially stepping away from the game or losing motivation. Of course, as mentioned before, South Korea has the unique problem of mandatory military service interrupting the primes of many of their best players. Either that, or they will simply just move on to different opportunities in their lives. And it felt like most, if not all of their players on their 2023 roster would fall victim to one or both of these detriments. Flying Tuna assured that he would still be here, but he needed to find a way to heal the scars of such a brutal loss. Karcher already postponed his military service numerous times, and it felt like the inevitability of that urgent responsibility would finally take over his life. The rest of their roster also had no choice but to find a way to recover from the loss and get their game into top shape if they wanted another shot at winning. But out of all of these circumstances, there may have been nothing worse than what Worst HR player had to go through. On May 24th, 2024, Badu, a Romanian top OSU player and former PP record holder, would post a controversial tweet containing a document titled Investigation of Worst HR Player. The document was a collaborative effort by a group of players that called themselves the Worst HR Player Extermination Squad, namely consisting of Badu along with Nigo and Xylus. Behind the scenes, they had a Discord server dedicated to compiling evidence of forums play that would be quote-unquote sufficient enough to confirm that he was cheating. However, their supposed evidence was flawed and the entire document was debunked immediately after its posting. But while the logistics of these accusations were terrible, the toxic morality behind them was much worse. All of this took place while Forum was asleep, and waking up to a group of people accusing you of cheating was undoubtedly horrifying for him to deal with. There were just so many things that made this a complete mess. Beyond the flimsy reasoning backing their failed claims and questionable apologies that came after their plans failed, things were beyond disastrous from a moral standpoint. For one, this document was released right before Worst HR Player was set to play in the Grand Finals of Corsair's Close 2024. There, he was slated to play against Malashevsky in one of OSU's premier 1v1 events, but the mental stress of the accusations compelled Worst HR Player to forfeit the match. Specifically, timing the release of the document right before the Corsair's Close Grand Finals was a dick move in all facets, and destroying Forum's motivation to play was even more of a spineless maneuver. And if that wasn't bad enough, Xylus and Worst HR Player were actually supposed to be teammates in another tournament. At Resurrection Cup 2024, both of them signed up for the tournament on the same team and were supposed to be playing alongside each other, but instead, Forum had to deal with this. Worst HR Player was betrayed by the people he considered to be his friends and teammates, who had ill intentions to bring him down when he least expected it, and this entire mess of a situation eventually boiled over, with Forum getting the worst of it. With the negativity directed at him and the chaos of the situation as a whole, Worst HR Player decided to step back from the community, citing the mental toll of having an entire group of people preying on his downfall. That was the cherry on top of all the things the South Korean OWC players had to deal with amidst the hangover of the most heartbreaking setback. We can all hope for them to move past all of this, but the reality of everything was too real to ignore. And out of nowhere, they now had to address the toughest task they ever had to face. How do you possibly recover from a series of events like this? If things stood as they were, this South Korea story would be one of the biggest tragedies ever witnessed in OSU history. Unbelievable rosters throughout the years who always found a way to steal the stage in everyone's hearts, featuring some of the most legendary and beloved players to ever touch the game. Many external factors tried to tear them down many times over, yet they always had the willpower to continue their quest in seeking the title that had eluded them for the past decade. In any other universe, South Korea would have ascended to claim the throne that had since abandoned them in the past decade, with their players solidifying their legacies with their crowning achievement they long sought after. But instead, all they were left with was the heartbreak they were forced to endure. And dealing with the apathetic nature of one of the worst controversies didn't help things either. Their eyes were still set on the ultimate prize, but time was running thin as availability and drive was even harder to come by. If they wanted another shot in 2024, they had to get past their toughest setbacks yet, and move on from the many disasters that tried to sap whatever motivation their players had left. And as the 2024 OWC season rolled around, many expected South Korea to seek redemption with a vengeance. But the question was, who would be the ones to lead them this time? When their roster was announced, the OSU community was pleased that South Korea's star-studded trio was here to stay. Flying Tuna kept his promise and once again would take the role as the captain of the South Korean OWC roster. Karcher, who was supposed to depart for his military service, was able to find a way out of the military again and found his way back to the team. And worst HR player, who had to survive an absolutely disastrous chain of events that tried to knock him down, found the resolve to give his all once again. And for the second year in a row, their big three was reunited. Amamiya Kokoro and Allegrissimo would run it back alongside them, with Fragrance of Page making his OWC debut fresh off a victory at the 3-digit World Cup, and Doomsday Fanboy returning to the roster for the first time since 2021 after finishing his military service. But perhaps their biggest addition to the team involved a player that could be the X factor they needed to finally claim the OWC title. Hyeok 2044 is a Korean Filipino OSU player who first created their OSU account on May 28, 2016, and since then he has quickly turned himself into arguably the best aim player in the world. With his ungodly consistency on most other maps as well, Hyeok possessed one of the most desirable and dangerous tournament skill sets anyone had to go against. His true breakout would commence after being discharged from his mandatory military service in 2023, where he would win some of OSU's most stacked events, securing championship badges at Belladonna's Duoigi Cup, Battle of the Box 2024, and the Perennial 2024. As far as country-based tournaments were concerned, Hyeok was a pivotal part of the teams that he played for. Hyeok played in the OSU World Cup for the first time all the way back in 2020, representing the Philippines. Historically, the Philippines did not fare too well at any rendition of OWC. In their first 12 years of OWC participation, they never made it past the top 16, falling into a plateau they just couldn't break. But after returning from his military service, he was able to competition after a one-year absence, and he was the catalyst to the Philippines' incredible rise at the 2023 OSU World Cup. Upon his return to the team, the Philippines were able to put together a formidable core 3 centered on Hyeok, Enri, and Nathan Ram. And with incredible support from Xylos, Milkteaism, Imposter, Miggy, and Zone Luis, they would wind up with their best finish at any OWC ever with a 5th to 6th place finish. They turned heads and shocked many throughout the course of the tournament, most notably upsetting the 4th-seeded Russia and taking a 4-1 lead over South Korea in the winners bracket semi-finals. Although South Korea would complete the comeback against them and they would get eliminated by the United States the very next week, they were a roster filled with an incredibly bright future if they were able to keep their core pieces. However, one decision would single-handedly turn the OSU world upside down. On July 18th, 2024, Hyeok would change his flag to South Korea, and immediately the ramifications of such a decision were clear. As per the OWC rules, this meant he was now eligible to play for Team South Korea, and lo and behold, the already stacked South Korean roster added yet another tournament superstar to their ranks. Such a movement like this was completely unusual within the OSU community. While it is theoretically possible for a player to play for one OWC team one year and a completely different team in the year after following a flag change, it's an exceedingly rare occurrence because of how OSU's flag change system works. As such, having a direct transfer of a player from one team to another, let alone a player with superstar talent going from one already solid roster to inarguably the best team in the game, was completely unprecedented. But alas, OSU had its own KD to the Warriors moment, or for those who don't speak in NBA terms, Hyeok's decision to change his flag on his profile allowed him to join the South Korean OWC roster and form the super team of super teams. With the sheer amount of talent on this team, South Korea were obvious favorites to win it all in 2024, and it came to no one's surprise that they would claim the #1 seed for the second year in a row. It's one thing to say they had the best team on paper. After all, everyone said that last year, but things didn't shape up the way they wanted to in the end. But this time, everyone knew that things felt different. Those who endured the heartbreak last year were hellbent on revenge, and adding Fragrance of Page and Hyeok made them that much more scary. People looked forward to the ridiculous performances this team had in store, and without hesitation, all of South Korea's players would not only live up to the hype and mounting expectations, but they would get off to a start of historic proportions.
South Korea are looking way too good.
That's a clean 6-0 sweep for the first time since 2018.
And this historical run of dominance for South Korea.
What more do you want from your #1 seed?
South Korea started off the 2024 OSU World Cup with 4 consecutive match sweeps in a row. 5-0 over Belarus, 5-0 over Brazil, 6-0 over Hong Kong, and most impressive of them all, a 6-0 shutout over the 5th-seeded Germany. They decimated all their opponents as they won each and every single one of their first 22 maps in a row. That was the most number of maps any team won before losing their first map in OWC history, beating out the United States start in 2018 where they won the first 18 maps in a row. South Korea was on the best start the Osu World Cup had ever seen by far, and it wasn't even close. They became the first team ever to make it to the final stage of OWC after sweeping their first 4 opponents, and now they secured a top 3 badge before they even lost a single map. This 22 map winning streak to jumpstart their tournament run was the second longest streak in OWC history, only behind the United States' 25 maps in a row to close out their dominant run in 2019. And as fate would have it, South Korea and the United States would have to face each other once again in a high leverage situation.
It is an immovable object versus an unstoppable force. The clear-cut top 2 teams in the bracket this year.
South Korea might have been the favorites entering this match, but history stood on the side of the US. For the past 5 years, the United States have been invincible in the finals and grand final stage of the Osu World Cup. The last time they lost a match in the finals or grand finals weekend of OWC was all the way back in 2018 when Bubbleman's Heroics took the United Kingdom to a bracket reset situation against the US. But little did anyone know that would be the last match beyond the semifinals the United States would lose for the next 6 years. Since then, the United States went 17-0 in their matches in the finals and grand finals of the Osu World Cup. They would always find a way to prevail when the light shined brightest despite the many teams and players gunning for their spot at the top. Forget their 4-year stretch without a match loss or the many incredible players they have fielded throughout the years for a second. This was by far the most tantalizing part about going against the US. Whether they issued massive blowouts in these later stages or if their matches were decided in the dying seconds, they always found a way at the expense of their opposition. Their head-to-head history didn't make things sound much better either, as South Korea were an ugly 0-6 against the United States in the finals and grand finals of OWC. South Korea had no choice but to vanquish their demons in the exact same setting they found themselves being bested year after year. They might have already put a dent to one unfathomable aspect of Osu's ultimate dynasty, but once again, it was up to them and them alone to stymie history once again.
Man, I am so good with momentum is this United States team. This one is long gone, and it's going to be a pretty sizable win here for South Korea on their second pick.
To hold at the end. South Korea with a 450,000 score. Tuna will break, but there's not enough time.
Down 2-4 and facing a breakpoint deficit, South Korea needed a breakthrough to get themselves back in this match. But out of nowhere, they would hit their stride, first by taking their Hard Rock 1 pick led by Karcher and Worst HR player. Then, Hyeok and Fragrance of Page would steal away the United States Nomad 3 pick with 2 FCs, and then tied 4-4, Worst HR player would do this.
Into the last quarter now, another drop for Rectagon, and it is still so close, under 100k, but in favor and growing for South Korea. Takedo to find another couple of drops. Alamiya Kokoro, Hyeok and Utami all breaking at the same point, and that will do it. It's another point for South Korea. This looked like a massively close point when we loaded into the map, but Worst HR player is here to say, nah, no problem. Put me in once again. Put me in for every single map so far, and I will continue to deliver.
An incredible FC from Worst HR player gave his team a 5-4 advantage, the first time that South Korea held a lead at any point in this match. But that was short-lived, as Takedo and Utami would both put up FCs on Fremont 2 to tie things back up at 5 apiece. An absolute aiming masterclass from each of the 4 players on the Korean side put them at match point with a 6-5 lead. But with no more map picks at their disposal, it meant that they would have to either clutch out the tiebreaker or steal away the United States' final pick. But as that map 12 trickled down to a close, another piece of Osu's unbreakable dynasty would fall at the hands of South Korea.
Absolute havoc as both teams finding misses all over the place. The only one with any semblance of combo is Rectagon. He is finding his way. He is building a path through this ending in the map. Can he hold on long enough? Can the rest of his team hold it together enough to bring this score lead back to the side of the United States? It's all on his shoulders. The star player for the United States. He's had a giant World Cup so far, but can he bring it back to force the tiebreaker versus South Korea in winners finals? Is there enough time? Is there enough combo? It's only 80k, but there's just more for South Korea, and more is all you need. Whether it's 80k, 800k, 1.1 million, it doesn't matter. A point is still a point, and that's all they needed to close it out and get to the grand finals.
They finally broke past the unbreakable wall that had gotten the best of them for the past near decade. This was the first time ever that South Korea took a match off the United States in the finals or grand finals at OWC, and the first time the United States had lost at this stage of the tournament in 6 years. For the 3rd year in a row, South Korea were in the winner's side of grand finals, one match win away from winning their first OWC title in 11 years. And hey, in the losers bracket grand finals, Australia took a 4-1 lead against the US and looked set to eliminate them. Such a development would be completely unexpected, but hey, maybe this time... Well, of course it had to be decided this way.
And now we're here, seeing them meeting in the grand finals for the 3rd year in a row. For South Korea, It's the story of a team cast for so long as the underdogs, endlessly searching for glory. The United States, meanwhile, have written a legacy of nearly incomparable success.
The stage was once again set for a South Korea versus United States OWC Grand Final. For the third year in a row, these two teams would battle it out for Osu's most coveted crown. Once again, there was nowhere to hide. If South Korea really wanted to make this happen, they would need to find a way to take down the US once and for all. For the past few years, they have slowly chipped away at each and every one of their historic streaks. In 2022, they ended their tantalizing 4-year long match winning streak. In their previous matchup, they were the first team to beat the US in the finals or grand finals of OWC in the past 6 years. And now, once again, the only thing that stood between them and claiming the OWC title was the most inevitably agonizing statistic the United States dynasty possessed. It was already difficult enough to even take a single match off the US in the first place and put them in the losers bracket. Up to this point, they are the only team to win the Osu World Cup in the double elimination era without losing a single match, and they have done so 3 times. But even when a team does pull off the miracle and sends them to the losers bracket to put them at risk of elimination, they ascend to a whole new level. The US played in 21 elimination matches since their first OWC victory in 2015, and have won 20 of them, with their only loss coming in 2017 during Poland's first and only OWC win. But in the other instances they found themselves in that situation afterwards, they got shut down, along with many other incredible teams Osu has seen through the years. Every dynasty has a trait that makes them feel unbeatable, and that 20-1 record in elimination matches since 2015 was that trait for the US. Whether it was a matter of being outmatched or the pressure of potentially being the ones that end their winning ways, try as they might, teams in this situation just couldn't finish the job. This was the one true inevitability all teams had to struggle with, and now South Korea once again found themselves staring at the face of the most death-defying trait of Osu's greatest dynasty. This matchup right here marked the 5th time South Korea would face the United States with a chance to eliminate them. The first 2 times were in the grand finals of 2022, where they were completely outmatched from the start. Their next 2 chances came in the grand finals of 2023, where they got so close to breaking the mold, putting the US on their last gasp with 2 match points in their favor, but their fate ended up being sealed for their demise yet again. They knew that everyone placed their hopes in them, and for better or for worse, they were fully aware of the history they found themselves going up against.
The United States is going to open the grand final with a break point.
Very much more than high enough for the United States.
Quite one-sided first point on the board.
Cover's intact. Utami and Window Life are tearing this map to pieces. As long as they don't miss on air, it's done. Another breakpoint solidified for the United States on hidden 3.
Now down in the first set of grand finals 1-4, things were once again looking dreadful for South Korea. Facing a deficit like this in any situation would leave anyone in dire straits, but against the same team that bested them at this stage of the tournament not just once, but for the past 4 times they faced them in the grand finals, at the rate things were going at, the South Korea roster would have to relive the same outcome they were all too familiar with. In each of the past 2 years, South Korea found themselves 1 match win away from the first OWC title in a decade and on the verge of completing a magical run that would have sent the Osu community into a collective uproar, only to end up getting thrown into a bracket reset and eliminated by the United States, the same team that now dominated the game after superseding SK's early reign. And from the looks of it, we were heading down that same path once again. With everything they had been through, the many roster changes they endured, and the many sacrifices they made just to get to this point, another defeat like this would be beyond devastating. So much had to go right for them to be in contention this year, let alone for the past decade, and for it to end like this would be a travesty words can't explain. Not only would the legacies of these players feel so incomplete without an OWC title, but this could very well be the last chance South Korea's roster had of completing the championship run that had eluded them for so long. Asking for their fate to change on a dime like this would essentially be the same as praying for a miracle. But sometimes, when even your best efforts feel like they're not enough, and you desperately try to do anything to avoid the same heartbreak you've gotten so familiar with, it feels like a miracle is the only thing that can save you. Even in the moments of our worst misfortunes, they say everything happens for a reason. But what if the reason is so demoralizing, knowing the truth would leave you nothing but dread? What if your reality has been so cruel for so long, it feels like fate is actively working against you? That's when all reason loses its rationality and it feels like some kind of force is willing your demise. And when that happens, the only thing left for you to believe in is a miracle in hopes of something that will save you. After everything this South Korean team had gone through, no one could blame them if that's what it felt like for them, especially as they were now staring down the path of heartbreak far too familiar to them. The situation is bleak, the stats pitted against them are unruly, and the history behind this expected outcome has claimed their souls numerous times over. A miracle was the only thing that could save them. A miracle was the only thing they could hold on to.
But United States 4-1 up now, another break point in their pocket, and they have the chance to consolidate it on their own pick.
Momentum stopped by just a little bit. Breakpoint solidified for South Korea. Flying Tuna and Wesley Child Play's performance were instrumental.
4 points on the trot for South Korea.
1 map away.
But you wouldn't believe in something that wasn't feasible, right?
This is the moment! This is when magic needs to be seen! Utami is left on his own! The rest of USA are crumbling! South Korea moments away from achieving what has so long felt impossible! The lead is still so high, but the time is ticking! Watch as the USA dynasty crumbles to the ground! And all that is left is a throne to claim for South Korea as theirs! Dynasty destroyers! Curse deleters! This is South Korea! For the first time in 11 years, your 2024 Osu World Cup champions!
South Korea's win at the 2024 Osu World Cup marked the end of many things. It was the end of their 11-year-long winless OWC curse, it was the end of the United States' streak of 6 consecutive OWC victories, and it was the possible end of Osu's greatest dynasty as we knew it. South Korea single-handedly brought an end to all of that, but that wasn't before they had to endure a chaotic string of ups and downs with crazy developments that came to their aid or their detriment. If there's one thing we can take away from all of this, it's that sometimes it's okay to chalk things up to fate. Sometimes the reasons for certain occurrences are so outlandish they can't be explained otherwise, and that's perfectly fine because fate doesn't need an explanation. Within the tale of their crowning jewel of their first place OWC badge lies a series of events so meticulous with its series of rising hopes and heartbreaks, it culminates into an end result that feels like sheer destiny. And there is no better word to describe their story. With everything they had been through and how much they struggled and how perfectly everything worked out for them in the end, it goes without saying that South Korea is Osu's team of destiny. And that doesn't need an explanation, because that is something you can feel.
I'm so f***ing proud of you, Tuna. I'm so fucking proud of you.
Thank you, man.